So, and we've got a little treat to end with, because our friend, colleague, mentor, the god of peatland conservation, Clifton Bain, is retiring. How did that happen? We're all getting older, but Clifton's going to retire in a few weeks' time, I think, December. So we're not quite sure what we're going to do about Clifton, but we will carry on. So Clifton's going to finish this conference off for us, giving us some reflections of his very, very long career in peatland conservation and climate. So over to you, Clifton.
Well, thanks. And yes, those of you who know me, it's 14 years with the IUCN Peatland Programme, but my bog days go literally back to when I was 16, so it's been a long time, and I ain't stopping. From December, I will still be interested in peatlands. The voice is gone as well. The point of this session was to give you partly a reflection on what I think that nobody's actually really interested in. What we want to do is look forward, and we've heard over the last 3 days some phenomenal shared ideas about what we need to do to go forward. But I am going to indulge myself on a little look back. The first thing to say is that when we started in 2009, it actually followed work that Rob and Stuart Woods and others and Johnny Hughes had been doing to bring the peatland community together and say, what are we doing about this huge problem? And there was a frustration at that conference. Before the IUCN programme had started, there was politicians, the statutory sector were unsure. They were getting conflicting advice from the scientific community. The statutory agencies felt, well, we've done what we wanted. We've got a lot of the peatland, over 80% of it's in designated sites. What more do you want from us? There were pilot projects, fairly low-level funding, but they were starting to do the job of peatland restoration and speaking to stakeholders at ground level, but they too were frustrated. Their contracts were for 3 years, 2 years. They didn't know if the money was going to be available next year. They knew they had hundreds of thousands of hectares to restore. So that frustration, again, the innovative views of my colleagues, Rob and others, they went to a philanthropist and said, this is crazy. It's one of the biggest environmental initiatives of our time and problems of our time. We know what the solution is, but it's not joined together and it's not happening. We've got to do something about it. And that frustration is essentially what led to the IUCN UK Peatland Programme. So when I started, the first thing on our minds was, why are the scientists not giving us the information to allow us to step forward? What is going on? And it was conflicting science, but there was a consensus in there. So we focused on that consensus. First job, get a commission of inquiry out. What's people's views of what's important, what needs to be done, what is the science telling us? And no underestimate, the commission of inquiry was the biggest research review on peatlands that had ever been undertaken in the UK. The respondees, right across from landowners, land managers, farmers, scientists, 300 people put into that inquiry. The beauty about it was, for the first time, it started to say, the problem is huge. This carbon story is actually really significant. We may not know it in its entirety, but it's big. The benefits and the potential benefits are huge for biodiversity, for climate, for water. Again, we may not know the full scientific story, but we're starting to see that this is big. And then there was the crucial bit for me was there was agreement across the sectors. The gamekeepers were saying, of course we don't want these eroding peat bogs on our grass moors. The farmers were saying, we're losing lambs into these erosions. Of course we don't want that. So instead of it being a conflict story, we're starting to become a common goal. And that message from the Commission of Inquiry became really important. And from the Commission of Inquiry, we were able to go to the politicians and say, this is important. The evidence is strong enough for you to do something. And it was quite astounding. People have forgotten this, we got a 4-country ministerial letter from the ministers of each country signing a joint statement following that Commission of Inquiry saying, peatlands are really important. We agree between the 4 countries we've got to do something about it and injecting into investment, avoid the long-term costs of these deteriorated peatlands, and we will put in place strategic plans to deal with this. That was massive, it really was, and there's a quite wee document sitting on our website somewhere, but achieving that was hard, and it wasn't us, that was the agencies and the civil servants that managed to help pull that off. But 4 ministers, that commitment to peatlands, all because we finally started to show the evidence. Following on from the Commission inquiry, we produced, Emma largely pulled together the strategy, the UK strategy for peatlands, again, the first ever coordinated strategy with its goals and objectives. And from that, you've got the 4 country plans that each have their own routes for how they're going to help deliver our peatland goals. Fantastic stuff, they're strategies. Don't dismiss them entirely. They do have power and influence, these things, and they do help keep us on track. We heard yesterday, from the global speakers, we're not working alone, and that's important for 2 or 3 reasons. The global movement addressing the peatland crisis, as Hans Houston always says, every country in the world has peatlands. It's just the ones that are not listed just haven't found their bogs yet or their fens yet. They exist across the world. It is a global problem. You have the global partnership, you've got international directives, biodiversity directives talking about peatlands, climate directives talking specifically about peatlands, Ramsar, all of these big drivers pushing countries, and you heard how even developing countries, not just Southeast Asia, but Congo, the Republic of Congo, committing to peatlands with a peatland officer right in the middle of the Environment Department. That's huge. We're not alone. We can share experience, but equally they can make sure we don't lag behind because we're going to look silly. The UK was a front runner in developing a mechanism to pay for and support peatland restoration, and we don't want to lag back, so it is important that we carry on. It was interesting as we went round with the Commission of Inquiry. We did parliamentary events where we presented the results of the inquiry, and we would meet, this is what, nearly 10 years ago, we would meet youngster politicians on their way up. You know, the Northern Ireland Agriculture Minister at the time then became the Northern Ireland Deputy Minister. This wee man over there was Secretary to the Treasurer. He then, because he'd been a Peatland MP, one of the projects took him out on site, explained the issues to him. He was then in Treasury, stood up in the House of Commons, and again, for the first time, said, peatlands are really important, we need to invest in them, I'm going to put some money into this. It was brilliant at the time. Now, you've got Therese Coffey as well. We managed to get to present the government's interest in peatlands at the House of Lords. So, they got it. The number of times members of Parliament, ministers came to us and said, this is important, I get it. You know, you may be cynical, but that was powerful stuff and we hadn't had it before. The science was one thing, it allowed us to give ministers and government comfort, but the thing that was really working was the on-the-ground evidence. And we had the early projects, the Moors for the Future, Exmoor, Flow Country, Pennine Peat Life, all of these, Yorkshire Partnership, all of these able to demonstrate on the ground that we had the skills and the techniques. This wasn't pie-in-the-sky stuff. We have the skills, and we were leading in that. And we had the ability to scale it up, and we had the agreement of stakeholders. This wasn't just some NGO environmental wish or buy the land and turn it. We were able to bring in adjacent landowners, and private landowners were willing to go on, and they knew what the mechanism. That was so much more important than just the science at encouraging that this was a realistic option going forward. I like to embarrass Richard with this photograph because I asked his permission to use that photograph in one of the books, and then we discovered the unfortunate lump in his trousers, which is purely a photographic aberration. The reason Richard's there is Richard has helped me literally throughout my career in understanding peatlands. I am not an expert, and Richard has vast experience. There are people across Europe who have spent their lives visiting peatlands and understanding them, and Richard's among them. But he has that additional ability of being able to interpret the science for us. It is difficult when you have two polarised scientific reports. Richard is able to cut through it because he understands the underlying ecology, and he understands why that scientist is saying X and the other is saying Y, and that has really had a phenomenal influence. And we as the IUCN Peatland Programme have tried to follow through with that, helping decision makers understand why the science is conflicting and allow them to make sensible decisions. Again, look back to 1800, and these are, it's a very quick exercise, you can do better yourselves, I'm sure, references to peat in the House of Commons and House of Lords, so in the debates, in ministerial statements, etc., etc. And there were little references to peat before the 19th century, the 20th century. During the 1930s to the 1940s, if you look at what those discussions were about, it's all about peatland rehabilitation. It was brilliant until you discovered that meant turning it into productive agricultural land instead of the horrible wasteland that it was. Lots of debates about responding to the war by digging up our peatlands and producing more food, and etc., etc. That then died down, and you went through the 50s and 60s. A lot of that was about how do we get trees onto these horrible areas and improve our forestry outcomes. And then we get to 1990, and that's where I was a sort of young lad in my conservation career along with Rob and others, and it was a real moment for the NGOs to say enough's enough. Initially driven by the raised bogs being dug up by commercial peat extraction for horticulture. It's such a horrific, obviously wrong thing that the movement started. But it was a bigger, they put a proposition to Parliament that we need to have a proper plan, national plan for our peatlands, and we need to deal with all the problems facing our peatlands. And the debate is literally what you see spiked there. Unfortunately, there was a complacency in government. After all the days of debates and eloquent lords coming up and saying incredible things, it's worth going back and looking at those debates. Wonderful stuff from some amazing speakers. The government's response was, yeah, we hear you, it's all in hand. We've got a nature conservancy agency who's doing a great job, they're looking after them, they're all looked after in protected areas. They couldn't see the bigger way forward. They just felt everything's in hand, don't worry. So we had a bit more stagnation. And then the Commission inquiry, engaging with Parliament, had its impact, but what was really starting to happen, and the spike in the 2020s there, was that the narrative had widened. Instead of talking about single issues, it was talking about peatlands as essential for climate change, essential for water, essential for biodiversity. We need to deal with the problem. There was a much broader range of what are the threats and problems arising from these degraded peatlands. There's discussions about how can we take the opportunities forward and help people to achieve our peatland goals. It was a much wider encompassing and intelligent debate, and hopefully goes forward like that. So where do we go next? This is the real meat. The trouble with writing one of these talks a week ago is that you learn so much on the day, but it is incredible how, and I think that's the biggest thing that's hit me over the 14 years, is how we're all now very clear what we need to do. The confusion's gone, there's a phenomenal shared vision. It's just not presented quite there yet, and certainly not with the urgency that it demands. And absolutely no room for complacency. We've all been so busy for the last 14 years. It must feel incredible when you see 20,000 hectares of peatland restoration and the blood, sweat and tears that went into that. But unfortunately, when you see the scale of the job needing done, it's a slow progress. So the State of Nature report, just published last week, 25% of peatlands in good condition. Actually, that's a doubling from what our estimate was of 10%, so that was progress. But at the current recovery rates that we're achieving, we'll achieve 30% by 2050. That was the State of Nature report comment. Our actual goal that we put into that peatland strategy with everybody's effort is for 60% of peatlands to be in good condition by 2040. So we're not going to meet our target if we carry on at current recovery rates. The other message coming out loud and clear is single purpose focus isn't going to help us. Just maximising peatlands for carbon or whatever is the biggest financial benefit. We'll end up with a further cost down the line, because to get the best of our peatlands, a whole ecosystem approach, with twin crises, with biodiversity and climate. They're both interconnected. We can't assume we can tackle one and the other will follow. We have objectives and obligations for both biodiversity and climate change. And we need to be smart enough to adjust our carbon delivery and our biodiversity tools so that we get both. And so it is an ecosystem approach. And I have, as an observation, I started my career with biodiversity policy work. I have seen a dropping off of interest from government, not internationally. The biodiversity State of Nature report was appalling. The number of species, and just even in my interest area, the birds, that are endangered, internationally important, whose populations are collapsing. And if you're clever and look at those species, the red list species, the internationally important species, most of them are peatland species. All the breeding distribution maps follow the peatland areas. So the Dunlin absolutely depends on peatland restoration to recover its massively declining population. Golden plover shows the other side of the climate debate, and that's adapting to the changing climate. And we heard that from Indra at the start, the Committee on Climate Change. We've also got to accept, we're doing so badly at reducing our emissions, it's inevitable we're going to see climate change, and our species are going to struggle. And I won't explain it fully now, but the tipulid, one of the keystone species, the dragonfly, the daddy longlegs larvae that feed so many of the moorland birds, including grouse, their populations are absolutely dependent on good, stable water tables. And with the drying out of the peatlands and the degraded areas, their numbers drop. Climate change is also affecting the period at which they emerge, and the young golden plover chicks aren't finding tipulid adults to eat. It's a lovely story. BTO have explained it. And what's really important about the story is if you readjust the water levels and restore the site, tipulid numbers improve, and there's enough to support the increasing golden plover population. So it's a method of building resilience in the face of changing climate. Re-wetting helps our golden plover, and it's something we need to remember alongside our perhaps enthusiasm for carbon and water. This is Inch Marshes, if anybody knows, and that's Ruthven Barracks up in the Highlands of Scotland, built in the 18th century to stop those nasty Jacobites and control them. They took over the barracks for a while, it was all good fun. But the point I wanted to illustrate here is Inch Marshes is one of Europe's biggest floodplain fens, and if you've not been up there, it's well worth it. It's a huge site, 10,000 hectares, and it's an area where early conservation was about, here's a designated site, protect it from bad influences as best we can, including the likes of RSPB buying up bits to stop it being damaged. The conversation around Inch Marshes has totally changed. It's much more the type of conversation we have here in the fens, etc. We need a shared objective. That is crucial to the flood management for the downstream cities. So much water runs into these areas that if you don't get the management right, if you don't allow the fields to flood, it goes straight down into the town's villages. So these people have an interest in this. It's not the conservationists that are driving this, it's the fact that the community now understands that the wise management of that peatland is in all their interests. And it's the Nevermind the Barracks is about that. Let's stop having it as an us and them or different agencies with their objectives. We've got a shared objective and we need to push that forward. The obvious thing in the horrendous place where we are of constant change in prime ministers, let alone ministers, is that you have to start at the bottom of the hill again. You've spent so much effort briefing a minister, building them up, taking them out on site, and then they change. It's an inevitable part of our life, and we've got to keep doing it, and we've got to keep doing it more. There's going to be big political change on the horizon, and we've got to start again and get these elected representatives not just feeling that peatlands are important, and well, knowing what they are for a start, but recognising that actually this is a huge job and one that they're committed to, believe it or not just from what they've written in their local plans and UK plans, but there's a global imperative on them to deliver. They need to know that, and they need to see and understand the scale of what's required. The biggest thing, we've had for Britain, we've had a huge injection of cash into restoring peatlands, and it's been great. But really, it's got to be massively multiplied, but more importantly, anybody who speaks with the land managing community, they're looking beyond the restoration. They're looking to, what is this land going to be for me now that I've restored it, or if I restore it, I need to know what it's going to be. The concept of public payment for public benefits we all latched onto. We thought that's the way forward. If these farmers and groundsman managers, anybody managing peatlands are going to get some reflection of the benefits that society gains from these highly restored peatlands, then that will make the land useful and valuable to them in its recovered or natural state. So that whole concept is crucial, because otherwise we stop at the restoration. And then the next fun thing that comes along, wind farms, trees, whatever, the land manager's got their eye to it because they see no inherent value in that repaired peatland. You could use sticks, as many of my civil servant friends have suggested, is once you've restored it, we'll beat you if you dare damage it in future. That's really not going to make, first of all, it's going to be really expensive to monitor. We know that type of compliance monitoring is very costly. And secondly, they're not exactly going to love their bogs with that approach. So the whole concept of carbon farmers, or horticulture, of public payment for public benefits is a much more positive proposition, and we need to really home in on that because government's not there yet. The other thing we have to move away from is this contrast between here's what nature wants and here's what farming wants, and that photograph just illustrates the problem there. There should be a shared vision across a much larger landscape, and the Fens is a perfect example. We've all been speaking about it for the last 3 days. A common vision that delivers for farming, that delivers for peatlands. It doesn't mean natural peatlands everywhere. The analogy with forestry, we don't have a forestry plan that says native woodlands is the only thing and it should be everywhere. Of course you can have powerhouse Sitka spruce production, but if you've got a grand plan, you don't stick your Sitka spruce on the bog. You've designed and planned. Now we're not good at that, but as we're hearing in the Fens, it's the only way to operate. We cannot operate in little parcels, and we cannot have pressures that take you in one direction on one parcel of land and encouraging people in another direction on another pocket of land. Private funding. I'm a zoologist, and the early days of the Peatland Code came from the industry. Literally, businesses and financial entrepreneurs were saying to us at our first conference, please develop a code and a standard, because if we're going to suck in private money, they don't believe that we can deliver restoration, let alone carbon benefits. And they encouraged us to adopt the concept of the Peatland Code. They also told us that they need an honest broker. The IUCN was seen as somebody who could manage this code and have a bit of trust and respect. Don't underestimate the private sector's desire for rigour. If they feel they're being ripped off, and they've been ripped off so much in the past, the big shells and all these players have so many stories of being ripped off in the past, absolutely critical you have good standards. And that's why Rennie and the team have had to develop incredible skills beyond our normal zoology skills into a rigorous code that, as you heard from Chris at CH, aligns with government targets, has mechanism. It feels uncomfortable when you're the project on the ground, but you're getting money from businesses who are absolutely risk averse and don't want to be ripped off. So bear with it. It's not the only solution is the next message. I've heard one or two whispers from government of, oh, it'll be great when this gets up and running and we won't need to inject so much money into our peatlands. Nah. Business won't allow that, because if they think they're replacing government's job for them, they'll back off. Interestingly, businesses are saying, and if anybody reads the natural capital discussions that big businesses are involved in, what they're saying is, we're not doing this because it's nice. We want the natural environment to be healthy, because a poor environment and a damaging climate harm our financial bottom line. As we do our financial economic modelling going forward, a screwed up environment and climate change affect the bottom line of our financial model. Investing in the environment to help protect our interest is as much about what they're doing as it is about philanthropy. So it has to be two. Government has to show that it's increasing its funding to meet the challenge, and the private sector will come along. The two funds are different. Yes, you've got to have a lot of rigour with the private funding coming in, With government, there can be looser mechanisms to make it easier for people to receive the money on the ground, but never expect the private sector to come in instead. My experiences with the moorland community, I come from RSPB, and my granddad was a gamekeeper. I've used that occasionally as a way of avoiding the sticks and stones that came at me. We're two different communities, but for once there was a common goal. They were saying, we agree in the need to restore and repair the peatlands, and we were both able to, Rob and I met Richard Benyon, the Environment Minister at the time, and he said, all sounds great, but who's going to beat me? What are the Grousemoor owners going to say if I agree to this peatland restoration? And we honestly could say to them, they agree. They absolutely support this. Where the problem lies is we're spending inordinate amounts of parliamentary time, scientific time, our team's time, fighting about how do we restore the peatlands. Surely burning is the best way to achieve peatland restoration. Well, I'm sorry, the evidence doesn't show that, and that's part of the problem. There's so little research out there on this type of topic that we're left fighting, and we're back into the silos of one scientist says it's good, the other scientist said it's bad. And I think we have to accept in any of these big challenges, the science is never going to be perfect for us, but we know which blooming direction to go. And again, a plea amongst you as the people, practitioners on the ground, you know you can restore a bog without burning it. Bring that information to the table, because all that government's getting is a very strong, effective lobby. And we need to say to government, stop getting caught in this battle between two groups. It's not about that if you want to achieve the common goal. But we do also have to improve the science. There's no getting away from that. The investment in the science will reduce the conflict. It'll also help us attract funding because it'll justify and quantify the benefits. Harry Potter trying to do voodoo doesn't work. That wasn't. I don't think I convinced them. The next thing that we're all seeing is a skills capacity issue. So we've really stepped up to the plate. People are restoring at a phenomenal rate. Have we got the contractors? That was one of the first things I was told about ambitious targets. We'll not deliver these if we don't have the contractors. Have we got the skills and workforce within the statutory agencies, within the NGOs, to understand how to help take this forward? So the whole business, and it is enlarging, and I am so pleased to see it, the development of peatland training courses, introduction to peatlands for schools, further career development. But look hard at your organisations. Is the expertise and training really being fed across the organisation? We wouldn't treat forestry like this, in this sort of haphazard way. Forestry is, manuals are written, guidelines are produced, you get your training, then you're allowed to go on. It maybe has changed, but that allowed a rigorous approach. We have so much expertise, and then the person leaves after 3 years and is gone from the organisation. So building peatland expertise into our organisations and making sure that what we learn, developing standards, good standards for restoration. There are rogues out there chucking peat into a hole and calling it peatland restoration. I won't say who they are, but they used to work in the coal mines and build wind farms. So there are rogues. There are also really good wind farms doing superb quality restoration, feeling aggrieved that they're putting all this effort into a quality bit of restoration and nobody's holding them to account. So some sort of standards and a development of training and skills has to follow our increased ambition. Engaging the public, the Eyes on the Bog initiative, it really came out of a Home Fen post. We saw the Home Fen post and thought, such a good public figure illustrating the point that peatlands were in trouble. And that was what it was designed for at the start, to show the threat of these 18th century and 19th century drainage activities. More of that type of iconic image of here's how your bog's performing. So that was where Eyes on the Bog started. It's got the opportunity for citizen science involvement so that people, children, adults get engaged in the peatlands, see that it's under threat, see that it's improving. There are other initiatives like this that are trying to bring citizen science in, and it is an opportunity we're going to have to develop, not least because, as you've seen with the tightening on public budgets, you're going to compete against paying a nurse or a doctor versus, let's put money into a peat bog. Society has to understand that this is also a high priority and not just something that can be ignored. Emma covered the growing team. I hate looking at photographs of me from 14 years ago, so we'll move on. And the other lesson, I think, going forward is I started campaigning against peat and horticulture in the late 80s. I visited Thorne Moors one evening with a friend, statutory protected site, lovely site, and there it was being milled completely bare, legitimately, with planning permission, perfectly allowed. And I, as a youngster, got angry. And I discovered that the agencies had no power and that we couldn't do anything about it. We agree that it needs to be stopped, but powerless. And that's where the real sort of campaigning, the campaigning for peatland, an end to the use of peat in horticulture started. And it did have traction. Our members of NGOs started to get it. There was a long job, and the quality of the alternatives was variable, so that there wasn't the support from the horticulture sector that we got. Roll forward now, and what really, we are literally on the cusp of a ban. I'm sad it didn't happen before I retired, but you know, any DEFRA people in here, we're so close. We cannot suddenly falter because, oh, it's complicated, there's one or two industries left who might be affected. We can make exemptions, time-limited exemptions for genuine hurdles. But the more I speak to the industry, even growing carnivorous plants does better in the sphagnum in the old peat product. So no excuse for not finally getting this ban. But the reason we made such rapid progress in recent years was the development of quality products. But the people asking for the ban wasn't just the public, it was the horticulture sector. They saw demand globally for sustainable products. Dinosaur products were going to be under pressure from all walks of life, whether it was the banks financing them or other competitors. So there was a recognition we have to move forward to a sustainable way and develop a sustainable horticulture industry. And so from within the industry, you had this recognition that a ban would help accelerate the development of the alternatives and take us forward. So it wasn't just a greeny environmental ask. And I think that's a lesson as well on how we go forward. I didn't manage to make the workshop on the historic environment, but I've been, you know, just like anybody, you watch the stories that are coming out from the historic archive, and that's what attracts people in many cases. Yet we haven't had as big a discussion around this stuff as we should. Not only are there stories there that will help engage people and make them appreciate peatlands, but there is also a responsibility. If we're going to make one of the biggest land use changes that this country's seen in a few 100 years perhaps, we've got to do it in a way that doesn't then destroy the historic environment that we're still interested in. So there's been a lot of work recently on trying to make sure that our restoration ambitions work alongside the need to protect our historic environment. And finally, the thing that's going to bring the public on board and allow taxpayers' money to be spent is reconnecting people with peatlands. I went to a conference in Cork in the Republic of Ireland. Similar audience, academic, policy, practitioners, but there was a new element. It was the cultural, artistic recognition that these peatlands were part of us. They, as a society in Ireland, have a huge, rich, written culture. Ancient books, manuscripts talking about spiritual leaders going to the bog to get rejuvenated. They feel, even if it is their grandfather digging peat in the bog, they have a connection. Most people in Britain don't have that connection with peatlands. Maybe they've seen a bag of peat, that's about their strongest connection, and that has to change. And when I approached my publisher for the peatland book, it was Des Thompson from the Statutory Agency in Scotland, Nature Scott, said to him, Clifton has to be able to do a peatland book. I've done woodland books before. And the publisher went, whoa, I need to get people to pick it off the shelf. And I just said to the publisher, no, I can guarantee you, 50 peatlands across the UK that blow your mind if you visited them. Okay. So we produced the book, and that typified to me the problem that he lives in the Highlands, and he just hadn't realised that people would be interested in peatlands. So that's a key part of the challenge going forward. And you know, I blew my mind just recently going around these sites. I'd forgotten how nice some of them are, and the new way of restoring peatlands where you build in access and interpretation for the public is really paying dividends. Most of the peatlands I visited, raised bogs, whatever, There were people pushing young kids in pushchairs. There was a bog on the edge of Edinburgh. Mothers and fathers going around with their toddlers all day long, because it's a piece of open ground, a bit of fresh air, a nice accessible boardwalk. They love it, but you just don't find that connection to peatlands in most people. So it's vital to help build that, and relatively easy. I did a fag packet exercise where I think every person in every city in Britain is within an hour's bus journey of a bog, probably even less, or a peatland. So ministers used to say to me, this peatland issue it's a Highland thing, isn't it? That's how bad it was in terms of awareness of peatlands. So final slide, just to say that the feeling for me is that we have come a long way, but let's be frank, the frustration that the way forward is, there is a massive job to do. We're not seeing the urgency in our elected representatives. It's going to be hard, but actually, we've done hard land use changes before. The forestry model isn't one to repeat by any means, but they decided we need to up our game, have lots more forestry in the 1940s and 50s, and they went about it in a grand plan approach. Let's not keep looking at peatlands as little projects here, there and everywhere. This is a grand plan. Let's get our 60% of our peatlands in good condition by 2040, and to do that, it's a coerced or a concerted effort across government departments, across the players, and we've seen that if they facilitate and pull the right levers, the conflict disappears. We bring people along, but they need to do that, and they need to buy into the grand plan. And they're not alone. Other countries are doing it, other countries are moving. And so I think the challenge for going forward is, how do we convey that now is the time for a grand peatland plan, whatever you want to call it, and grand vision, and buy the decision makers and the public into that proposal and get a mechanism and the funding and the staff that delivers that. Sounds scary and difficult, but we have done it before, and don't underestimate it. This is a big plan and a big project. You know, I keep saying it's one of the biggest environmental opportunities we've ever seen that we can deliver. So many environmental issues are too difficult. We know how to deliver this one. It just needs that. So as I reflect, that's what I'll be watching. Thank you.
Not surprising, a fantastic talk from Clifton, but reflecting on 40 years of work on peatland conservation. So, just on behalf of this community, let's just give Clifton another round of applause for that 40 years of work. Look, I hope you've enjoyed this conference. It's been brilliant to come to the Fens. I mean, very often run our conferences, focusing on those very large, the largest semi-natural peatlands in the uplands and in the west of Britain. And so it's just lovely to come here. And like Stuart, I also grew up on the edge of the Fens, so I'm very familiar with this landscape, these big, wide open skies, but I don't really know that much about them. It's just been wonderful to understand really the immense complexity of this incredible fenland landscape. It's a place that really illustrates the issues that we face as a society, those issues of climate change and how it's going to impact upon all of us, on biodiversity loss and the sheer impact of that, not least on food production, and all that, how that interplays with government policy and public support and private profit, in a way that you don't really see in other landscapes. It's certainly more intense here in the Fens than, say, in the upland areas, where there's very similar things. So we've been on a bit of a tour, we've weaved across this really rich and cultural, natural landscape that is the Fens. But we've weaved across the policy landscape, the research landscape, weaving through that kind of tapestry. So I hope you've really enjoyed it. I hope you've been challenged. I've certainly been challenged in your thinking, and I hope the Fens have really inspired you to keep working for peatland restoration, because as Clifton says, we've got a lot to do. We've still done a lot, but we've still got a lot to do. So whoever you are, we've seen some brilliant stuff from salad farmers, never thought I'd say that, from researchers, from water managers, from plant growers, from architects, from peatland restoration contractors, struggling with the 4-month window and all the rest of it, to those of us that wade through the survey data to build the management plans, to get through the regulations and actually get plans implemented on the ground, and those that grapple with the trade-offs of public policy making, which always involves a complex weave, which of course is what this conference is all about, in fact what this programme is all about. It's about weaving that tapestry together, and when you look at the peatland tapestry, of course it's still incomplete, for sure it is. It's tattered to almost unrecognisability in places. We've walked across a few of those today in this field trip. But we're really making progress, we're making repairs to that tapestry, and you can foresee Clifton's day when that tapestry emerges again, bright, shiny, colourful and vibrant. Vibrant, I think, being the right word. So keep up the amazing work and remain optimistic about the future. So it just leaves me to say thank you. Thank you to our hosts here at the Maltings. Thank you to Ely as a town that's looked after us, a fantastic place. Thank you to the IUCN Peatland Programme team that organised this, and I particularly want to say thank you to Jane. She's fairly new into the team, has done an incredible job putting all this together. Massive thank you to all of our speakers that do all of this for free, really. Just brilliant you take part in all of these things. And a massive thank you to you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being the peatland community and building that consensus of vision together. Let's build that tapestry back. Safety, any hope. Thank you very much.